Sometimes life's biggest changes happen on the most ordinary days. For Grace Wong, that day came during a rainy evening at the annual Tech for Tomorrow charity gala in San Francisco. As one of the city's rising stars in biotechnology research, she hadn't wanted to attend another stuffy networking event. But her boss had insisted, saying the company needed to maintain good relationships with their donors. Grace stood near the refreshment table, nursing a glass of sparkling water and checking her phone when someone accidentally bumped into her. Her phone went flying, only to be caught mid-air by quick reflexes that belonged to Alex Chen, the founder of Next Gen Solutions. "I think this belongs to you," he said with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "I'm usually much more coordinated, I promise." That chance encounter turned into hours of conversation. While other guests networked and discussed business deals, Grace and Alex found themselves tucked away in a quiet corner, talking about everything from their shared love of old sci-fi movies to their immigrant parents' sacrifices to give them better lives. "My mom worked 3 jobs to put me through college," Grace shared, surprised by how comfortable she felt opening up to him. "That's why my research means so much to me. I want to make affordable medicine available to everyone, not just those who can pay for it." Alex's eyes lit up. "That's exactly the kind of innovation we need. You know, my company has been looking to expand into biotech. Maybe we could work together somehow." Their professional discussion quickly evolved into coffee meetings, which turned into dinner dates, and before they knew it, they were spending every free moment together. Despite Alex's wealth and status as a self-made tech millionaire, he remained down to earth. He drove an old car he'd had since college, preferred hole-in-the-wall restaurants to fancy establishments, and always remembered to ask Grace about her ongoing research projects. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he told her one evening as they walked along the beach, watching the sunset. "Most people see the successful businessman, but you see me for who I really am." Their whirlwind romance became the talk of the tech community. Magazine articles painted them as the perfect power couple, the brilliant researcher and the innovative entrepreneur, both dedicated to changing the world for the better. But Grace didn't care about the publicity. She was falling in love with the man who brought her soup when she worked late at the lab, who made terrible science puns just to make her laugh, and who looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. 6 months after they met, during a private hot air balloon ride over Napa Valley, Alex got down on one knee. "I know this might seem fast," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "but when you know, you make me want to be better, to do better. Would you marry me?" Grace's happy tears nearly made her drop the ring as she said yes. The following weeks became a blur of wedding planning, with Alex insisting on a destination wedding in Bali. "Let's make it magical," he said, "something our grandkids will hear about someday." What Alex didn't know, what Grace had just discovered but hadn't told him yet, was that their future family might be starting sooner than planned. 3 days before they were set to leave for Bali, Grace sat in her bathroom, staring at a positive pregnancy test. Her hands trembled as she looked at the 2 pink lines, but her heart was full of joy. She decided to keep it as a surprise, planning to tell Alex after the ceremony. She even bought a tiny onesie with "Daddy's Little Scientist" printed on it, tucking it away in her suitcase. Every time she caught herself touching her stomach or smiling at the secret growing inside her, she imagined Alex's face when she would tell him the news. Their friends and family flew out to Bali, filling the luxury resort with laughter and excitement. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, Alex seemed distracted, but Grace assumed he was just nervous about the big day. He kissed her goodnight with unusual intensity, holding her a little longer than normal. "I can't wait to start our life together," he whispered, and Grace went to bed dreaming of their future, the family they would build, the lives they would touch through their work, and the love they would share. Little did she know that life was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test her strength in ways she never imagined. As she drifted off to sleep, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, Grace had no idea that tomorrow would bring a storm that would shake her world to its foundations. The morning of the wedding dawned with perfect Bali weather, bright sunshine streaming through wispy clouds, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of tropical flowers. Grace woke up early, her heart fluttering with excitement. Her mother and best friend Lisa were already in her suite, ready to help her prepare for the biggest day of her life. "You look just like an angel," her mother said, tears in her eyes as she helped Grace into her wedding dress. The ivory silk felt cool against Grace's skin as she thought about the little secret she was carrying, their future child who would hear this story someday. Everything was perfect. The beach had been transformed into a dreamlike setting, with white chairs lined up on the sand and flower petals scattered along the aisle. Strings of lights hung between palm trees, ready to twinkle as evening approached. The wedding planner had outdone herself, creating exactly what Grace and Alex had envisioned during their late-night planning sessions. At first, nobody worried when Alex was running a little late. "Grooms are always nervous," Liza assured Grace, who was waiting in a beachside cabin that served as the bridal suite. But as minutes turned into an hour, an uneasy feeling settled in Grace's stomach that had nothing to do with morning sickness. The wedding planner's smile became increasingly strained as she made call after call. Grace sat perfectly still in her wedding dress, watching the hands of the clock move painfully slowly. Her phone showed no messages from Alex, just dozens of concerned texts from guests. Finally, the hotel manager knocked on the door. In his hands was a white envelope addressed to Grace. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis as she read the few lines written in Alex's familiar handwriting. "I'm sorry. I can't go through with this. Please don't try to find me. It's better this way. Alex." The next few hours passed in a blur. Grace's mother took charge, a quiet strength holding everything together as she informed the guests, handled the vendors, and arranged for everyone's early departure from the resort. Grace sat in her room, still in her wedding dress, feeling as though she was watching everything happen to someone else. "I'll kill him," Liza declared, pacing the room. "How could he do this? How could he just leave like that?" But Grace barely heard her. Her hand kept drifting to her stomach, where their baby was growing, unaware of how dramatically its future had just changed. Back in San Francisco, the story exploded across social media and tech news websites. "Tech billionaire leaves bride at the altar," screamed the headlines. Grace's phone was flooded with messages, some offering support, others fishing for gossip. She turned it off and didn't turn it back on for days. When she finally returned to her apartment, she found all of Alex's things gone. His assistant had apparently packed everything while Grace was still in Bali. It was as if he had never existed, except for the engagement ring on her finger and the baby growing inside her. Grace tried everything to reach him. She called his office, but his number had been changed. She emailed, but her messages bounced back. She went to his company's headquarters, only to be politely but firmly turned away by security. His social media accounts had been deactivated. It was as if Alex Chen had vanished into thin air. "He's left the country," a sympathetic former colleague of his finally told her. "Nobody knows where he's gone." As the weeks passed, Grace faced the hardest decision of her life. Should she try harder to find him? Should she announce her pregnancy to the world and force him to acknowledge their child? But as she sat in her doctor's office, listening to her baby's heartbeat for the first time, she made her choice. "I don't need him," she whispered to her unborn child. "We'll be fine on our own." She threw herself back into her research work, grateful for the distraction it provided. Her colleagues tactfully avoided mentioning Alex or the wedding, instead focusing on her groundbreaking research in affordable medicine development. Grace found strength in her work, in her family's support, and in the simple fact that someone else now depended on her. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that her next doctor's appointment would bring news that would change everything. As she walked into the clinic that autumn morning, Grace was prepared to face life as a single mother to one child. She had no idea that fate had much bigger plans in store. The ultrasound technician's surprised gasp would mark the beginning of a new chapter in Grace's life, one that would eventually lead to a confrontation nobody could have predicted. But for now, she was simply a woman rebuilding her life, one quiet day at a time, carrying a secret that would eventually shake the foundations of everything Alex thought he had left behind. Grace sat in the waiting room of her doctor's office, flipping through a worn parenting magazine without really reading it. At 12 weeks pregnant, she was finally starting to feel like herself again, though morning sickness still caught her off guard sometimes. Her mother sat beside her, insisting on coming to every appointment since Grace had told her family about the pregnancy. "Wang, Grace." The nurse called, and Grace followed her to the ultrasound room, her mother close behind. The technician was chatty as she prepared the equipment, making small talk about the weather and asking Grace how she'd been feeling. The cool gel on her stomach felt familiar now. This was her third ultrasound. But something felt different this time. The technician grew quiet, her brow furrowed in concentration as she moved the wand across Grace's belly. Is everything okay?" Grace asked, her heart beginning to race. "Let me get Dr. Chen," the technician said, her face unreadable. She hurried out of the room, leaving Grace and her mother exchanging worried glances. Dr. Chen arrived quickly, took one look at the screen, and broke into a broad smile. "Well, Ms. Wang, it seems you're in for quite a surprise. Actually, 4 surprises." "4?" Grace's voice came out as a whisper. "Congratulations, you're carrying quadruplets. And from what I can see, they all appear to be developing normally." The room started spinning. Grace's mother grabbed her hand, speaking rapidly in Cantonese, a sure sign she was overwhelmed. Grace stared at the screen, where Dr. Chen was pointing out 4 distinct shapes, 4 tiny heartbeats flickering like stars. 4 babies? Grace finally managed to say. "How is that?" "I mean, we didn't use any fertility treatments." "Spontaneous quadruplets are rare," Dr. Chen explained, "but they do happen. Given your age and health, you're actually an excellent candidate to carry multiples." However, her tone grew serious. "This will be considered a high-risk pregnancy. We'll need to monitor you very carefully." That evening, Grace sat in her favorite reading chair, looking out over the city lights of San Francisco. 4 babies. The magnitude of it kept hitting her in waves. Her hand rested on her stomach, which suddenly made more sense. She'd been showing earlier than expected. The next few months became a crash course in preparing for multiples. Grace's tiny apartment wouldn't work. She needed a house. Her savings, meant for a down payment someday, would now go toward preparing for 4 babies. Her mother insisted she move back home, but Grace was determined to maintain her independence. "I can do this," she told herself every morning, looking in the mirror at her growing belly. And somehow she did. Her research team was incredibly supportive, allowing her to work from home when bed rest became necessary in her second trimester. Her sister helped her find a small house for rent in a quiet neighborhood. Her friends organized a massive baby shower where she received 4 of everything, the living room overflowing with tiny clothes and supplies. The pregnancy was challenging. Some days, Grace could barely move, her body struggling to support 4 growing babies. But each doctor's appointment brought good news. All 4 babies were developing well, defying the odds that often came with quadruplet pregnancies. At 32 weeks, earlier than a single pregnancy but remarkably good for quads, Grace went into labor. The hospital had been prepared for weeks, with a team of doctors and nurses ready. Her mother, sister, and best friend Lisa surrounded her with support as she faced the biggest challenge of her life. After hours of labor and a carefully orchestrated C-section, Grace heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the cries of her babies, one after another. 2 boys and 2 girls, all healthy, all perfect. As they were placed in their individual incubators, Grace caught her first glimpse of their tiny faces. "They're fighters, just like their mother," the nurse said warmly as Grace was wheeled into recovery. The next few weeks in the NICU were a blur of feeding schedules, kangaroo care sessions, and learning to tell her babies apart. They were small but mighty, each with their own personality already showing. The older boy was calm and observant, while his brother was constantly moving. One of the girls was incredibly vocal, while her sister was the quiet dreamer. Grace named them after nature, river and sky for the boys, rain and storm for the girls. Names that represented strength and beauty that could grow with them as they grew into their own people. As she sat in the NICU rocking River one evening, a nurse mentioned how unusual it was to see spontaneous quadruplets. "They're like little miracles," she said, adjusting Sky's blanket in the next incubator. Grace looked at her 4 tiny fighters and felt a fierce love that overshadowed any pain from the past. These babies were her future, her family, her everything. She had no idea that this miracle would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic legal battles the state had ever seen, or that her quiet life was about to be thrust into the spotlight in ways she never imagined. But for now, in the peaceful NICU with her baby's soft breaths surrounding her, Grace was simply a mother, falling more in love with her children with each passing moment. The challenges ahead would be many, but looking at these 4 perfect faces, she knew she would face them all with the same strength that had brought her this far. 12 years passed like a whirlwind. Grace's quadruplets grew into bright, curious 12-year-olds, each with their own distinct personality. River had inherited his mother's love for science, often conducting experiments in their garage. Sky was the family athlete, excelling at every sport he tried. Rain was the artist, filling sketchbooks with detailed drawings, while Storm lived up to her name as a passionate debater who questioned everything. Life had fallen into a busy but happy routine. Grace had risen to become one of the leading researchers in her field, developing breakthrough treatments that made affordable medicine more accessible. Her work occasionally put her in the spotlight, but she carefully managed her public image to protect her children's privacy. It was an ordinary Tuesday when everything changed. Alex Chen sat in his London office, scrolling through scientific journals while his assistant briefed him on the day's meetings. His company had expanded globally, and he'd spent the past 12 years building an empire, trying to outrun his memories of San Francisco and the bride he'd left behind. "There's an interesting article about breakthrough cancer treatments," his assistant mentioned, pulling up a digital magazine on the large screen. "It might be relevant to our new biotech division." Alex's coffee cup crashed to the floor. There on the screen was Grace Wong, looking barely changed from his memories. But it wasn't Grace that made his heart stop. It was the 4 children standing beside her in the article's photo. The caption read, "Dr. Wong celebrates breakthrough with her family at the research facility's open house." 4 faces stared back at him, all around 12 years old. 4 faces that struck him with shocking familiarity. The boy in the blue shirt had his mother's eyes, but Alex's distinctive nose. The girl in the red dress had the same dimple he saw every morning in the mirror. But most telling was the boy in the green shirt. He was nearly identical to Alex's own childhood photos. "Sir, are you all right?" his assistant asked, noticing his pale face. Alex couldn't speak. His mind was racing, calculating dates, remembering his last night with Grace. 12 years ago. 4 children who looked exactly like him. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He spent the next week in a daze, having his private investigators confirm what he already knew in his heart. Grace had been pregnant when he left. Not just pregnant, she had given birth to quadruplets, his children. 4 lives he'd known nothing about, 4 birthdays he'd missed, 4 first steps, first words, first days of school. The investigators' report was comprehensive. River, Sky, Rain, and Storm Wong were top students at their school. They played in the band, competed in science fairs, joined sports teams. Grace had raised them on her own, never seeking him out, never asking for support. The children knew nothing about their father. Grace had protected them from both the pain of abandonment and the public scrutiny that would come with being Alex Chen's heirs. Looking at their school photos, Alex felt a desperate need to know them. River's science fair project on renewable energy could have been pulled straight from Alex's own childhood. Sky's determined expression in his baseball team photo reminded Alex of himself. Rain's artistic talent reflected his mother's creativity. And Storm, her debate team victories showed a fighting spirit that made him proud and ashamed at the same time. He watched videos of school performances his investigators had found, tears streaming down his face as he saw Storm deliver a passionate speech about climate change, Rain play the violin in a recital, River and Sky perform a science demonstration together. These were his children, and they didn't even know he existed. The weight of his actions 12 years ago crushed him. He'd left Grace because he panicked, convinced he wasn't ready for marriage, terrified of repeating his own father's mistakes. Instead, he'd made a far worse mistake, abandoning not just Grace, but 4 innocent children who had grown up without a father. Alex spent nights pacing his penthouse apartment, looking at photo after photo. Should he reach out? Did he have the right? Would Grace ever forgive him? Would the children want anything to do with him? His wealth and success felt hollow compared to what he'd missed. Finally, he made a decision. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to make things right. He instructed his lawyers to prepare documents asserting his parental rights. If Grace wouldn't let him see the children voluntarily, he would use the legal system to gain access. What Alex didn't realize was that his actions would spark a legal battle that would capture international attention. He thought money and power would smooth his path to his children's lives. He had no idea that Grace would fight him with everything she had, or that the quadruplets themselves would have strong opinions about the father who suddenly wanted to claim them. As his private jet took off for San Francisco, Alex stared at the latest photo of his children, trying to memorize their faces. He was about to shake their world to its foundations, and nothing would ever be the same for any of them again. Grace was in the middle of helping Storm with her homework when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found a man in a suit holding a thick envelope. "Dr. Wong, you've been served," he said, handing her the documents before walking away. Her hands trembled as she read the legal papers. Alex was demanding shared custody of all 4 children, claiming she had deliberately concealed their existence from him. The words blurred before her eyes. Petitioner seeks immediate and substantial access to minor children. Emergency hearing requested. DNA testing. "Mom? Who was that?" Storm asked, coming to check on her. Grace quickly tucked the papers away, but her daughter was too perceptive. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." That evening, after the kids were asleep, Grace called her best friend Lisa, who had become a family law attorney. "He can't just walk back into their lives after 12 years, Grace said, pacing her kitchen. "They have no idea who he is. They're happy, they're thriving. How can he do this to them?" "We'll fight this," Lisa assured her. "But Grace, you need to tell the kids before they hear it from someone else. This is going to be big news. Tech billionaire discovers secret quadruplets. The media will be all over it." Grace spent a sleepless night thinking about how to tell her children. The next morning, she called them into the living room for a family meeting. They sat in their usual spots, River cross-legged on the floor, Sky sprawled on the beanbag, Rain curled up in the armchair, and Storm perched on the sofa's arm. "I need to tell you something important," Grace began, her heart pounding. "It's about your father." The room went completely silent. They rarely asked about their father. Grace had told them years ago that he wasn't ready to be a parent, and they'd accepted that with remarkable maturity. "His name is Alex Chen," Grace continued. "And he's recently learned about you. He wants to meet you." Storm was the first to react. "Alex Chen? The tech billionaire? The one who's always in the news?" River's eyes widened. "The founder of Next Gen Solutions. Their AI technology is revolutionary." "Wait," Sky interrupted. "He abandoned you, right? At your wedding?" "I read about it online once." Rain stayed quiet, but Grace could see tears forming in her eyes. The questions came rapid fire after that. Why now? What did he want? Did they have to meet him? Grace answered as honestly as she could, explaining about the legal papers, about their rights, about what might happen next. "We don't want to meet him," Storm declared, always the spokesperson for her siblings. "We don't need him. We have you." But as the days passed, curiosity began to mix with their anger. River secretly looked up articles about Alex's technological innovations. Sky found himself watching interviews with his biological father online. Rain drew pictures of what she imagined their first meeting might be like. Even Storm's adamant resistance began to show cracks. The media frenzy exploded just as Lisa had predicted. Reporters camped outside their house, forcing the children to stay home from school. Social media erupted with opinions about Grace's decision to keep the quadruplets secret, about Alex's right to know his children, about the morality of using wealth and power to force access to them. The first court hearing was set for a rainy Thursday morning. Grace arrived early with Lisa, only to find Alex already there with his team of high-powered attorneys. It was the first time she'd seen him in 12 years. He looked older, more serious, but his eyes still held that same intensity she remembered. "Grace," he said quietly as she passed, "please, can't we talk about this privately? You lost the right to private conversations when you served me with papers demanding emergency custody," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The judge, an older woman named Judge Torres, listened carefully as both sides presented their initial arguments. Alex's lawyers painted a picture of a father cruelly denied his rights, while Lisa argued passionately about the children's stability and well-being. "These children have a right to know their father," Alex's lawyer argued. "They have a right to the opportunities he can provide them." "They have every opportunity they need," Lisa countered. What they don't need is the trauma of having their lives upended by a stranger who happens to share their DNA. Judge Torres removed her glasses and looked at both parties. This is not a simple case of parental rights, she said. We have 4 12-year-old children whose lives will be profoundly affected by these proceedings. I'm appointing a guardian ad litem to represent their interests, and I want them evaluated by a child psychologist before we proceed further. As they left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. Grace held her head high, thinking of her 4 children at home, probably watching this on the news. She hadn't fought alone for 12 years to give up now. But as she got into her car, she caught a glimpse of Alex's face. The pain and longing she saw there reminded her of the man she'd once loved, the man who might have been a wonderful father if fear hadn't driven him away. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if there might be a way forward that could heal old wounds instead of creating new ones. Little did she know, back at home, her 4 children were having their own intense discussion about the father they'd never known, each wrestling with emotions they didn't quite understand, and making decisions that would surprise everyone involved in this complex battle. The guardian ad litem assigned to the quadruplets was a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Rodriguez. She sat in her living room, watching as the 4 children tried to pretend this was just another normal day. But it wasn't normal. Nothing had been normal since they'd learned about their father. I'd like to talk to each of you separately, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. Everything you tell me is confidential. I'm here to make sure your voices are heard in court. River went first. In his mother's home office, he sat straight-backed in the chair, looking more like a mini-adult than a 12-year-old. I've read everything I could find about him, River admitted. His work in artificial intelligence is amazing. Sometimes I wonder if that's why I love robotics so much, if it's in my DNA. Mrs. Rodriguez made notes as River continued, but then I think about Mom, staying up late to help me with my science fair projects, even when she was exhausted from work. She's the one who believed in me. He didn't even want to know if I existed. Sky's interview took place in the backyard, where he could bounce his basketball while he talked. Everyone at school knows now, he said, his ball hitting the pavement in a steady rhythm. They show me his pictures on their phones, tell me how lucky I am to have a billionaire dad. The basketball missed the hoop. But where was he when I broke my arm in 3rd grade? When I hit my first home run? Mom was there. She's always been there. Rain chose to sit at her drawing table, sketching while she spoke. I used to imagine him, you know? Draw pictures of what he might look like. She showed Mrs. Rodriguez a drawer full of old drawings. A faceless man pushing them on swings, playing catch, reading stories. But now that I know what he really looks like, I can't draw him anymore. It feels wrong. Storm paced the room during her interview, unable to sit still. He thinks he can just buy his way into our lives, she argued, her voice rising with emotion. He left Mom at the altar. Who does that? And now he sends these expensive gifts we're not allowed to keep, like he can make up for 12 years with toys and technology. But later that night, Mrs. Rodriguez observed something interesting. The 4 children sat in River's room, having what they called their quadruplet council, a private meeting no adults were allowed to attend. Through the partially open door, she heard their honest discussion. Maybe we should meet him just once, River suggested, to ask him questions, like why he left. I want to know if he really regrets it, Rain said softly, if he ever thought about us. What if he disappoints us again? Sky worried. What if we let him in and he leaves? Mom would be hurt, Storm reminded them. She's done everything for us. The next day in court, Mrs. Rodriguez presented her report. These children are remarkably well-adjusted, she testified. They're thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply bonded to each other and their mother. However, they're also curious about their father. They have questions only he can answer. The child psychologist's testimony followed. Forcing immediate regular contact could be traumatic, she explained. But completely denying access could lead to resentment later. These children need to be given choices about how and when they want to build a relationship with their father. Alex sat in the courtroom, absorbing every word. He'd imagined swooping in, showing his children the amazing life he could offer them. Instead, he was learning painful truths about the impact of his absence. Grace watched her children's faces as they sat in the courtroom for the first time, dressed in their best clothes. River kept glancing at Alex, studying him with scientific curiosity. Sky fidgeted with his tie, stealing quick looks when he thought no one was watching. Rain sketched in her notebook, but Grace could see she was drawing Alex's profile. And Storm. Storm stared straight ahead, but her hand kept reaching for her siblings, maintaining their connection. When Judge Torres asked if any of the children wanted to speak, no one expected all 4 hands to raise in perfect unison. They had made a decision during their council meeting. They would face this together, just as they'd faced everything else in their lives. One by one, they stood before the judge. Their words were honest, sometimes painful, but also hopeful. They spoke of their happy childhood, their amazing mother, their fears about change. But they also spoke of curiosity, of questions unanswered, of a desire to understand their own history. "We want to know him," River said, speaking for all of them. "But on our terms, not because a court says we have to." "We need time," Rain added quietly. "And Mom has to be okay with it," Sky insisted. "And he has to prove he won't hurt us again," Storm finished firmly. The courtroom fell silent. These weren't just objects to be fought over. They were 4 distinct individuals, wise beyond their years, asking to have a say in their own destiny. Judge Torres looked at Alex, then at Grace, then back at the quadruplets. The decision she was about to make would need to balance legal rights with emotional needs, past mistakes with future possibilities, and most importantly, the wisdom of 4 12-year-olds who understood more about love, loyalty, and forgiveness than many adults in the room. Judge Torres took a full week to consider her decision. During that time, life continued in its strange new normal. The quadruplets went back to school, though now with a security guard to keep the press away. Grace threw herself into her research, and Alex remained in San Francisco, sending daily emails to his London office instead of returning. Finally, on a crisp autumn morning, everyone gathered back in the courtroom. The tension was thick enough to touch as Judge Torres began reading her decision. "This court has been asked to consider an unprecedented situation," she began. "We have before us 4 children who have grown up loved and supported by their mother, and a father who, upon discovering their existence, wishes to make up for lost time. While Mr. Chen's wealth and resources are substantial, this court's primary concern is the emotional well-being of these children." She paused, looking directly at Alex. "Mr. Chen, you cannot buy back 12 years of absence. No amount of money or legal maneuvering can replace the bedtime stories not read, the scraped knees not bandaged, the school plays not attended." Then she turned to Grace. "Dr. Wong, while your desire to protect your children is admirable, they have expressed a clear desire to know their father. They have a right to explore that relationship, even with its inherent risks." Finally, she looked at the quadruplets. "River, Sky, Rain, and Storm, you have shown remarkable maturity in expressing your wishes. This court intends to honor them." The judge's ruling was both creative and careful. Alex would not receive the immediate shared custody he demanded. Instead, the process would move forward in stages, with the children's comfort level setting the pace. Stage 1 would begin with supervised family therapy sessions, all 6 of them together, working with a child psychologist to build trust and understanding. Alex would need to attend parenting classes specifically designed for absent parents reconnecting with their children. "Money cannot buy instant family bonds," Judge Torres emphasized. "Those must be earned through time, patience, and genuine effort." The first therapy session was awkward. The quadruplets sat close together on one couch, while Alex perched nervously on another. Grace chose a chair between them, still their protector even in this controlled setting. "Why did you leave?" Storm finally asked the question they all wanted answered. Alex's response was honest, even though it didn't paint him in the best light. "I was scared," he admitted. "My own father was cold, distant, focused only on success. I was terrified I'd be the same kind of father. So instead of facing that fear, I ran away and became exactly what I was afraid of being, an absent father." "But you're here now," Rain said softly, trying to do better. Over the following months, small steps led to bigger ones. Alex attended River's robotics competition, sitting quietly in the back, but beaming with pride when his son's team won first place. He watched Sky's baseball games, though he kept his distance from the other parents who whispered and pointed. Rain invited him to her art show, where he spent an hour studying her detailed drawings, recognizing his own mother's artistic talent in his daughter's work. And Storm allowed him to attend her debate tournament, where she argued passionately about environmental protection, a cause Alex's company had recently begun supporting. Grace watched it all with mixed emotions. It was hard seeing the man who had broken her heart building relationships with their children. But she couldn't deny the joy on River's face when he and Alex discussed artificial intelligence, or the way Rain's eyes lit up when Alex recognized his mother in her sketches. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during one of their therapy sessions 6 months after the court ruling. Sky had just finished telling a funny story about a chaotic morning when all 4 kids had overslept. Mom was running around like crazy, he laughed, trying to make 4 different lunches and sign 4 permission slips. Maybe. Alex said hesitantly, maybe I could help with the school run sometimes. If that's okay with everyone? The room went quiet. The children looked at Grace, who took a deep breath. We could try that, she said carefully. Maybe one morning a week to start. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were missed appointments when Alex's work demanded attention, leading to disappointed children and tense conversations. There were moments of jealousy when the kids talked excitedly about time spent with their father. There were arguments about boundaries and expectations. But there were also beautiful moments of healing, like when Alex finally told Grace how deeply he regretted leaving her, not just because of the children, but because she had been the best thing in his life. Or when the children organized a surprise birthday party for Grace and insisted Alex help them plan it. 1 year after the court ruling, they all gathered for the Quadruplets' 13th birthday. The party was held in Grace's backyard, decorated with fairy lights and filled with the kids' friends. Alex had learned enough by then to check with Grace before bringing gifts, to respect the family's routines and traditions. As they watched their 4 children blow out their candles together, Grace and Alex exchanged a look of understanding. They would never be the family they might have been if Alex had stayed. But they had become something different, something that took more work, more patience, more forgiveness, but was still full of love. Make a wish. Someone called out to the Quadruplets. Storm spoke for all of them when she said, "Don't need to. We've got everything we need right here." And she was right. They had a mother who had never given up on them, a father who was learning to be worthy of them, and most importantly, they had each other. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale ending, but it was real, hard-won, and filled with hope for the future.